Aloha and welcome to Island Connections. I'm Ibrahim Aoude. Trump and the politics of race. We have three guests to discuss this topic. Cindy Franklin from English, and Ilima Long, and then John Okamura from Ethnic Studies. So could you first begin to say, like, what have you been doing in terms of activities on campus regarding like racial problems like travel ban, for instance, and so forth? And then we can go more into discussion about Trump and how he has been fanning the flames of racism and politics of hatred to build a fascist movement in the country as a whole to support a fascist state that's already in existence. And also that the campuses in the United States have not been immune of that kind of motion towards a fascist movement to support a fascist state. And then we can talk more about the local situation as well in terms of campus and even community. So Cindy, you want to say something? What have you been doing?
What have I been doing?
Activities, yeah.
One of the things that has happened since Trump has come into power is that on campus there's been the formation of an immigrant and refugee action coalition, otherwise known as IROC, that includes faculty and students, graduate students in law, in psychology and English and ethnic studies, as well as faculty members. And we've been meeting for about a year now. And one of the things that we've been trying to do, we've held some panels, Know Your Rights panels to talk about DACA and to support DACA students. And we've also been trying to reach the administration to have them formulate some policy to protect students and to say that we will not participate in the targeting of students who are in fear of deportation. So the administration has not been as responsive as we would like. They need a little bit more pressure, I think. But that's one thing. And then another is that we are underway with joining a national group, the Campus Anti-Fascist Network. There are a number of chapters across the country of this group, and then some actually in England as well. And that is just a form of organizing that's multi-pronged. It's to try and make campuses inhospitable for fascists by way of organizing educational events, teaching materials, formulating policy, organizing protests when fascists come to campus, and also academic defense for students and faculty who are under attack, as they increasingly are, by members of the so-called alt-right. I prefer to just call them white supremacists.
Yes, yeah. Okay, Ilima, would you say what you have been doing?
Sure. So I guess since Trump was elected, the thing that I've seen emerge is a lot of coalition and solidarity building, and that's what I've been mostly working on. So there's a number of groups, student groups on campus that just organized themselves over the past year or more, including the Black Student Association, Ethnic Studies Student Association. There's Iraq. There's the Students and Faculty for Justice in Palestine. And then there's sort of an unorganized but always together body of Kanaka Māori students that look at Hawaiian issues. And we've started to formally meet and talk about how to support each other. We see the common threads of white supremacy that string through all of our particular issues and struggles. So we know that connection is important. It's what brings us together. And we're trying to work through some of the tensions also about, in ways that those particular issues don't always match up nicely. But standing upon the humanity that we are all trying to protect for ourselves and for each other. So by way of there's a diversity committee within the graduate student organization, and representation from all of those groups have been meeting and talking about specific strategies on how to address Nazis and these sort of white supremacist individuals on campus, but equally as importantly, how to address and support the structural issues that are embedded within the university itself that uphold white supremacy and make us vulnerable. So that's what we've been working on.
Well, yeah, thanks. John?
Well, in my classes, I've been talking a lot about racism and how Trump is a perfect example of racist statements and his policies, and trying to also publicize some of the events that have occurred, the graffiti. I guess about a year ago, Black Lives Don't Matter. I found students were totally unaware that this had appeared, and the university was so slow in its response, and they hadn't heard anything about the Proud Boys incident. And I found them to be a great instructional tool about how racism is expressed and how he is a very race-conscious president, as opposed to the more colorblind ideology advocated by our previous presidents, and how his statements really bring these race-conscious policies of his quite apparent. I haven't been actively involved as Cindy and Ilima have, but it's mainly in sometimes just starting my class. What did Trump just say? Why is that a racist comment?
Yeah. Well, no, that's very good, to begin with, because we are focusing on what is being going on the ground in relationship to like fighting those kinds of issues. Because it's like Trump didn't invent racism. I mean, race is deeply embedded in American culture, right? I mean, we have slavery and the rest of it. But the thing is that at a time when you have economic crises, I mean, even from 2008 and on, and actually we haven't yet gotten out of that really. And you have all these kinds of layoffs and so forth. So a lot of people begin to be threatened. And then what they do, they blame the other victim, you see, which would be even a Chicano or an Arab or a Muslim or, Native American or whatever, what have you. And so when Trump, even in terms of his, when he was running for office, he was really talking about building a wall and this and that. And so that brought up, it seems to me, a lot of people who were in the woodworks or out of the woodwork, and to try and begin to organize in a serious way, although they were organizing before, but now in a serious way on the surface, given their support from in the White House, Bannon was there and other people still are there who agree with Bannon, etc. So he fanned the flames of all that kind of stuff that created this resistance to what he was doing. And one of the things, we can see, in the first few days, the travel ban, for instance, and then all of his talk about Chicanos and Muslims and Arabs and all of that created this kind of environment that really made people what we have on campus, the Proud Boys, and the United U.S. Continental U.S. You have even more than that, happening on the ground, beatings and and all of that. So. Do you have, in terms of, you mentioned connections between what we are doing, say, on campus here and other campuses, for instance, on the continental United States? Could you say something more about this before we focus on what's happening here?
Well, I think just to we've been alluding to what's been happening here, but I think it might help to say a little bit more concretely what's been happening here. And one of the things is the formation of a Proud Boys chapter, and the Proud Boys call themselves alt-right, and they have a lot of ideological incoherence on the surface of things, but they are a white supremacist group. They're very invested in a patriarchal form of nationalism. They swear allegiance to Western culture and all that entails. And they also have a lot of frat boy-like activities that make them seem silly. Even the name Proud Boys, which comes from an Aladdin song, where they're not gonna, the song involves a boy apologizing, but the Proud Boys don't apologize, and it's silly. And when they initiate, they have to recite the names of cereal as they're getting beat upon. So it seems silly, but actually it's quite serious. And because they seem silly, because they actually include men of color among their ranks, because they say they are not racists, they've been able to get permits. For example, for the Charlottesville March was obtained by Proud Boys. If you look at what they do, they are quite coherently white supremacist. They are quite coherently anti-Semitic. They are quite coherently anti-Indigenous. The thing they don't have ideological inconsistency about is the fact that they are incredibly sexist and misogynist. But there are a number of them on campus. They have been circulating white supremacy symbols. And again, they like to do ones that seem possibly ambiguous. For example, there is the saying cake, K-E-K, kill every kike. Sorry for saying that on TV. But it also is an Egyptian goddess. So they'll just say, what? You're against Egyptian goddess. So they have the Pepe the Frog symbol, and then they'll say it's just a frog and go back to its history, which is not a white supremacist symbol. So they do a lot of things in a way to create confusion. But they have been disrupting class. They boast about the fact that they're armed. They have threatened and intimidated professors and students in classes. And so they are a presence on campus. There have also been some swastikas on campus, which for me is quite shocking. As someone who's Jewish, I've been in Hawaii feeling like Jewishness is pretty invisible. And so it's a kind of strange eruption, but it's consistent with what's happening nationally, which is an outbreak of white supremacist violence. I think here it's also taking an anti-Indigenous expression, more particularly than it is in other places. So one of the things that we are doing from the location here is to situate ourselves in relationship to other campuses, to learn from each other about what to do if a fascist speaker comes to campus, what to do if a fascist students interrupt class and make other students unsafe. And so there's a sharing of strategies and also just learning about the patterns that connect these activities that are happening across campuses, because we're really seeing eruptions of this. Today I just read that Identity Europa banners went up all over UC San Diego. That was this morning's news. But it's each day there's something from one of these groups. As John said, there's not just the Proud Boys, but there's a number of these groups, and they're putting up a lot of posters. When Milo Yiannopoulos comes to campus, that's an occasion to foment violence that makes people feel unsafe. And I would also just like to connect this to anti-Palestinian, to violence against Palestinians, insofar as the posters that the David Horowitz Academic Freedom Center puts up are timed to occur at the same time as Milo Yiannopoulos coming to campus. And that to me shows a link between these white supremacist groups and these Zionist groups. And I think that bears looking at, and the kind of treatment and lack of safety that people who are working for Palestinian solidarity have experienced we are now seeing experienced by other faculty members who are fighting anti-Black violence, who are fighting white supremacy, who are at the front lines of other kinds of anti-fascist organizing.
Yeah, we will be broaching more of these items that you mentioned in a bit, but I want to talk about like KEK as like an Egyptian goddess. I must say, like ISIS also is an Egyptian goddess, but ISIS is a terrorist organization, you know, that do all kinds of terrorist stuff, and this is terrorism, right there, you know, in Hawaii, in the United States as a whole. Ilima, in terms of like your experience with this anti-Indigenous issues that are happening not only maybe from Proud Boys, but other fascist organizations here. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I know that you know, the Hawaiian movement and the Hawaiian sovereignty movement in particular have been named by Proud Boys Hawaii as, you know, the most extremist, you know, secessionist group, I think they call it here. And so, you know, for the Hawaiian sovereignty movement to make people uncomfortable is nothing new or jarring, but one of the tactics of Proud Boys is to agitate and instigate. And being that the Mauna Kea issue is such a big issue this year in particular, and will probably only get bigger as the year proceeds, there will be various, you know, gatherings and discussions and perhaps rallies around that. And so for, you know, to think about the idea of an agitator coming in and trying to, you know, blow those things apart through those kinds of tactics is just something that we're, you know, preparing for and on the lookout for. So thinking about those kinds of things, you know, but honestly, you know, a lot of attention is being given to the Proud Boys, and these are, and they are, you know, their behavior is unacceptable and their ideology is violent and dangerous. But when we're talking about white supremacy in Hawaii, we're talking about the settler state, and we're talking about a whole history, right? So what the thing that I really appreciate about the student organizing that's happening right now is that there is attention to that from non-Hawaiian student groups. So addressing, you know, the Mauna Kea issue is an issue of white supremacy. And it's not, you know, being facilitated by some undergraduates. You know, it's being facilitated by the university and by the state, right? So what's really good about the student organizing that's happening right now is that these other groups are really showing up as allies for this issue, and they see how that is the very same thing that is making undocumented students vulnerable in this place. And that the university coming out with a nice statement on undocumented students does not necessarily give them a pass or entirely disassociate them from the ideologies that President Trump is holding up and lifting up right now, you know, and giving a lot of voice to. And I know that you know, that might sound like it's convoluting the issue, but we actually see it as honing in on the issue and making for really meaningful coalition building and solidarity. And the fact is that the majority of students at the University of Hawaii are not privy to these phenomenon. And so the students that are paying attention to this, it's really important that we support each other. It's really important that we support each other's educational events, that we support, you know, and protect when those spaces, if the BSA is having a meeting, we're talking about strategies where those of us who are not in the Black Student Association can show up and just kind of be on the lookout for agitators so that they can build their space in their communities. So I guess that's kind of how I'm thinking about the Hawaiian context. Yeah.
And so, like, this gives you the opportunity to really educate and expand. I mean, not only in terms of like connecting with other groups, which is very important, because it's the same fight, you know, against like fascism and so on, especially now. But gives you an opportunity to educate your own members, like, you know, Kanaka Maoli, who are activists in terms of other kinds of things happening, but also like the larger community of Kanaka Maoli, so you can have more people like really becoming aware beyond only the cultural thing, hey, I'm Hawaiian, I'm proud of it, but, you know, more active than that kind of thing.
So there's two things, there's kind of two things happening, right? There's consciousness raising that's happening through making those connections of how these issues are all interlocked. And then there's the actual organizing piece. So there's the on the ground organizing piece, and then there is the consciousness raising. So it's good for the Hawaiian movement to think about, you know, how do our issues relate to what's going on in Black Lives Matter, or relate to what's going on in, you know, the movement for undocumented people, right? And it's good for, you know, Black folks in Hawaii and undocumented folks in Hawaii to think about, oh, how does my vulnerability relate to the struggle of Kanaka Maoli? So I know it almost sounds messed up to say, but there is those positive aspects that are coming out of the Trump administration, you know, like folks are really having to come together and fight together and meet each other at our humanity, rather than in the nuances of our, you know, the nuances are what bring us together, rather than are what posing barriers.
Yeah, and that expands, like gives the opportunity to expand the view or even the world view of the movement itself to a global perspective. That is to say, like, it's not happening only in Hawaii and all what I care about is Hawaii, but to see Hawaii in the larger global issue, and so becomes more open to events and things and struggles happening all over the world, right? Yeah. For instance, the Palestinian issue, what's happening in Syria, Iraq, and other places. Sorry, you wanted to say something.
Oh, no, I just wanted to say that I've actually noticed a difference since you have been organizing grad students in this way. And you can just feel the energy that is infusing these events that used to be more separate. And that it's been actually Kanaka Maoli students who have been crafting the language for a mission statement for the Campus Anti-Fascist Network, and that's done with attention and sensitivity to a range of struggles, but also with an insistence that this is happening on land that is part of a settler colonial project and ongoing occupation. And I just think that orientation strengthens all of these different individual interests in the way that Ilima is saying, but also I just wanted to say that I actually feel the energy at various events and in organizing things is just so much stronger since GS, the graduate student organization, has been really carefully bringing people together. So anyway, it's great
Did you
work.
want to say something?
You know, the explicit racism of individuals and organizations like the Proud Boys and the alt-right are basically providing a platform for everybody to take a closer look at white supremacy in all of its forms. And so,
John, on that, and then I wanted to ask you also to question and incorporate it with whatever else you want to say. Like, we in ethnic studies at least say, like, the main organizing principle in terms of Hawaii is ethnicity rather than race, but that doesn't mean that race doesn't exist in Hawaii. So could you say whatever you want to say, plus like integrate that into...
Well, to both Cynthia and Ilima, they've been bringing up these issues that are not very well publicized, even on our campus. There's been little said about the Proud Boys. And I think I learned more just from what Cindy just said several minutes ago than anything in the media. And students need to be aware of what's going on at their campus. If these right-wing movements, or as Cindy said, white supremacist movements and violent actions also are taking place, and that you should be really aware that they should be in a position to express their opposition to them Going back to what Ilima mentioned about the TMT issue, there was this email going around from faculty in physics and astronomy that referred to Native Hawaiians as having a Stone Age culture. So I brought that up in my class. Said, why is this an example of racism? I had one student try to, then started questioning me, well, did they have iron tools? I said, you're missing the point. You know, it's just a way of expressing how they view Hawaiians as inferior.
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Yeah, they're still living there.
Yeah, but this is being expressed by faculty with PhDs, and they have not gone beyond that kind of perception of Hawaiians in Hawaii too. And it's that kind of persistent racism that, as Cindy said, goes on right here at the university on ceded lands. That,
just like if we say, if we say like those guys are stargazers, you know, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, what
yeah,
does
sure.
that,
Yeah,
know,
exactly.
I mean, it's like
not
crazy.
paying attention to where they live, who pays their salaries,
Yeah.
taxpayers, including Hawaiians, and the university has not responded strongly to the emergence of these the racist expressions on campus. They come in with these very multiculturalist, inclusive statements, but nothing about sanctions, nothing that expresses that we should not tolerate these assertions of racism on campus, and the sanctions will follow.
Yeah, I mean, did you want to say something about the organizing principle, for instance?
Well, that's just my approach to analyzing Hawaii, but certainly race is far more significant on the continent.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so Cindy, you mentioned a few things like related to what's happening here. Could you say more about, for instance, the meetings that some students and faculty have been doing, and where is it going at this point?
I think there's a multi-pronged approach, and I would just say we're also not all on the same page. These are really difficult issues. I think we have different views about what constitutes free speech, and I think that's an enormously complicated issue right now, because under the banner of free speech, we're really seeing people, like right now, University of Florida has Richard Spence coming to campus. There will be $500,000 cost of security for his visit.
Appearance.
And when he comes to campus, violence ensues. He foments violence. Is that a free speech issue? Some people say yes, some people say no. So I think even, I think in our group we're trying to sort through some of those issues. But I think that there are people wanting to work on what you do in the classroom and the way that John's talking about. How does your syllabus get built? What kind of statements do you have about codes of behavior? There are people interested in working on policy. There are people interested in working on security issues, which are also really complicated. One of the ways that people have, I think, importantly been protesting visits by people from who call themselves alt-right is to point out that $500,000 of security is not only an enormous waste of student tuition dollars, but it actually creates the equivalent of a police state on campus. It does not make people feel safe, by and large. And so it's militarizing a campus. It's perhaps provoking rather than preventing violence. And yet some people will say, well, this is a free speech issue. These people have a right to speech. So these are some of the things that we're talking about right now because they are complicated. And I think that there's also just discussion. I mean, one of the things I'm particularly interested in is doing more to create a campus environment that denaturalizes some of this white supremacy, whether it be ongoing forms of it that come from the fact that this university is on seized land, but also the kinds of normalization that we're seeing right now under the Trump regime. I feel like we're in this place right now where we have to say, are Nazis bad? Like, you don't know if people will say Nazis are bad. You know, under Bush, it was like, is torture bad? And that seemed unbelievable. But now we have, like, well, are Nazis bad, or is that just a creed of belief?
Yeah.
I had a student who had swastikas drawn on her door. She's a Jewish student. And one of the things that really I found very upsetting about this was not only that swastikas were drawn on her door, but that she really felt like she was going to upset her roommate to make a deal about this. And I think that's a failure on the part of this university, on faculty and admin, if we are not making students feel like, you know, that they don't have that kind of power and right to say swastikas on the door, not okay.
Well,
we need to do more.
Is that the dorm thing? Or,
It was not dorm housing, but it was, you know, it's student, you know, it's students living on campus.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, you know, I'm interested in having events and featuring speakers that will help denormalize that kind of white supremacist violence.
Yeah. I mean, these are national events when they get reported as occurring at other universities when swastikas are drawn on students' rooms in dormitories, and this sort of thing never gets publicized here. The university tries to cover it up. The graffiti at the campus center.
Counseling for the students.
Yeah.
They suggest counseling.
Yeah, instead of saying, this is intolerable, whoever did this is going to face some serious sanctions, whether it's a student, faculty member, staff, or member of the community. We're not going to tolerate these kinds of actions. This goes beyond speech at this point. You can charge them with defacing university property, for example.
Yeah. Ilima, anything on that?
Yeah, that coping, you know, providing students mechanisms through which to cope with this kind of stuff on campus is totally insufficient. And then, you know, also I appreciate this discussion about free speech as well, because when Professor John Learned sent out that email from, you know, about Hawaiians living in the Stone Age, among many other, you know, things that he said, there was no response from the university until it went viral on Twitter. And then the only response was, you know, a reply to the tweet with a statement on free speech. And tolerance, you know, in the university. And so when we fail to look at the power dynamics of speech, we're not doing the free speech debate any justice, you know. There are students and faculty within that department that were appalled by the email that they saw and did not know if they were allowed to address it or anything, because, you know, there's a major power dynamic between a tenured professor and a student, especially a graduate student who is trying to make it sort of to the next stage, or who has no protections around their own free speech as a GA or a TA, right? And who doesn't know if that GA-ship is going to be there the next semester because there's nothing in place on this campus to protect those kinds of things. So when free speech is, you know, perpetuating a history and a discourse of violence on people, and especially when it is being spoken by folks who have power over students, like, that's not free speech at all. That's just intimidation and racism, period.
Yeah, I think this is a, you know, central point, the question of power, you know, differential right there. I mean, where's the free speech of the student, you know? That guy can squelch it right there because it's against his ideas and so on.
There's also a pattern of free speech being offered to people who are supporting racism or racist status quo. And people that are challenging that. And we're seeing this, again, nationally, people that are taking strong stands against anti-Black racism, for example, have been in danger of losing their jobs, and their admin have not come to their defense. I'm thinking of Johnny Eric Williams and Kianga Yamada Taylor, who, you know, were facing quite a bit of hostility from their admin instead of support for the fact that they were speaking out against white supremacy.
Yeah.
And so, it's about power and who's getting protected, who's getting $500 worth of security. It's very much about power.
And go ahead.
Can I just add something? Sometimes I wonder if the kind of climate we have here in Hawaii when it comes to these kinds of issues pertaining to race, ethnicity, indigeneity, makes many people believe, but probably the majority of people believe that we all get along well with each other. And so these kinds of incidents are episodic, that we can cover them up, as Ilima said, we'll do counseling or just see that as problematic for individuals. I mean, there were 2 forums, one of which I unfortunately participated in. There were, in the past couple of years, first was September 2015, the other one I did was last year, about a year ago. What can Hawaii teach America about race? They had the same exact title, and based on this premise that we've addressed these issues, we solved our problems, these things cannot happen here. And I think that carries over, or it's certainly related to how the university addresses these issues. They don't see them as connected to what's going on in the continent or other parts of the world.
Yeah, but also on that, I mean, we're talking about the power differential, but also these are supported by something you mentioned, but I want to underscore, is like institutional structures. I mean, from the state level to the university level to, city and all of that, these institutional structures support something, and that something is supportive of, I want to say it, fascism, neo-fascism. I mean, I'm very clear about that kind of issue, because if you look at certain things like happening in university, like militarism is right there in the university through like research and all of that. Okay, can you have free speech about that, and what can you do? I mean, and where, how publicized that your free speech is gonna be, against militarism, etc. I mean, the TMT is also an important issue right there.
Well,
so,
you can occupy the president's office as we did 10 years ago.
Yeah, no, we did that.
To draw attention to that issue of contracts.
About the military contracts and all of that. I remember this. But still, like, what becomes like what wins at the end of the day is military contracts, because that's what they did. You see what I'm saying? So the institutional structures are also very important, because embedded in it is the power relationship that get manifested. So I think that's an important thing to do, to say. But I wanted to talk about something you mentioned also about the Zionist-fascist connection. Could you say more about it? Because, I mean, here, like, these fascists talk about anti-Semitic thing, and yet, the Zionists are there, and they have like certain connections between these two kind of movements, apparently. Is that what you were talking about?
I mean, I think there are. That's a complicated topic.
Yeah, right,
I think there are connections.
Yeah.
I'm not going to conflate the two things by any means. And I think that there also are instances in which people who are fomenting fascism are very explicitly on these chat sessions they have. 4chan is one of them, saying, "Oh, when you do messed up stuff, do a Black Lives Matter hashtag or a Free Palestine hashtag." And to make these groups look bad. And so I don't know how pervasive that is.
Yeah.
But I do think that there is a tendency, there's a great admiration for Israel on the part of a lot of these white supremacist leaders. And they, I think that Israel right now is, that Zionism is a white supremacist project in Israel. And that it's exclusionary, it's anti-democratic, and so I think there are ways that some of these leaders in white supremacist movements here are drawn to the Zionist movement and drawn to Israel. Steve Bannon has no problem at all being an anti-Semite and a supporter of Israel, and I think one of the things that the White House administration in its current and then rapidly changing form. We'll just keep the people that were there as part of this conversation, since no one seems to last all that long. But one thing that is consistently being shown is that being an anti-Semite and being a Zionist are perfectly compatible. And so even as anti-Zionism is often cast, including by the State Department definition, as anti-Semitic, it is in fact Zionism that seems quite able to tolerate anti-Semitism. And we see this with Netanyahu right now, who has no problem whatsoever with some of these, some of these forms of white nationalism that are anti-Semitic, that are taking place, because it's a settler colonial project. It's about amassing land and controlling resources. And as long as anti-Semitism is not getting in the way of that, that's okay. If anti-Semitism can be used as a clarion call to defend land, then that's okay too. And I know this sounds very cynical, but I actually think that Zionism is not particularly concerned with anti-Semitism. There's a continuing conflation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, but I would say it's actually what we see is a conflation of Zionism and anti-Semitism, and a support between a Zionist project and a white supremacist fascist project in the U.S. I can't,
separate them.
I can't separate them, and I can't say that they're indistinguishable. They are distinguishable.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to ask about that, because
And there's ideological incoherence on the part of some of these groups when it comes to Israel. They say all kinds of things in the course of one day. Even the same person will say all kinds of things.
Well, I mean, we have Trump. He says all
he
kinds
says
of
all
things
kinds of things
in the same sentence, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, Ilima, you want to say something?
No, not in particular to that.
Yeah, okay. John, anything in terms of, this kind of anti-indigenous positions and activities in Hawaii date back to a long time ago. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking recent history
Right.
in terms of campus racism. About 25 years ago against Haunani-Kay sorry. That's how she was being represented. Graffiti, referring to her as Haunani-Kay trash, that appeared on trash containers on campus. I think it started with a Joy Carter letter to the editor that she wrote. And then subsequently, she was investigated for violation of free speech or academic speech rights. I thought that was just absurd. Clearly she was protected by her free speech rights as an academic on campus, but this issue did arise previously on campus, directed against sovereignty leaders. So it's a kind of repeat now of the TMT issue.
Yeah, it dates back also to Professor Porteous 20s, 30s, what I mean? And
well, the building, naming of the building.
And later on, other kinds of questions around voting for OHA and all of that, and people Rice, Freddie Rice doing hey, this is racism if the Hawaiians vote for OHA only because it's against the, 15th Amendment or something. Yeah, so, I mean, we have those things, but the point here that we have been talking about, that with Trump, given the global financial crisis and the economic crisis that's happening right now, these things have been mushrooming, these kinds of issues. And we see it coming to some classrooms at the University of Hawaii. I mean, this is outrageous. This leads me to something you mentioned about free speech, and I can understand sometimes it's kind of debatable, about free speech, whether this is free speech or not. But in some cases, to me, they are clear cut. I mean, if you are bullying through your free speech, that's it. Terroristic threatening. They haven't heard of terroristic threatening, the administration, U.S. administration, or the police? Can't you like have somebody get arrested because doing terroristic threatening? I think according to law, they can be arrested. So this tells us something about, where free speech stops, quote unquote, of a person if I am being threatened, etc. Okay, so that's any more discussion on that, Ilima?
I mean, it just brings to mind that one of the latest, I think it was FBI, terrorism reports, or who's identified as a domestic terrorist, is basically a report on the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter. So terroristic threatening is something that we also need to not just swallow uncritically if it suits us, because when it comes to free speech, that thing will be used to suppress, folks who are using free speech for what it's meant to use, which is to bring consciousness and bring light to really oppressive power dynamics and institutions. So I think it just came out in August, and they're labeling them as Black identity extremists, right? And that's a label that now is under domestic terrorism.
But that's the power structure doing
and these
that.
these are organizations that have been, that have really blossomed and been built and organized over the past 3-4 years by queer Black women. And so, so to think about free speech too in terms of the relationships to these labels and who will be repressed and who will not be repressed, it still goes back to like supporting these institutions of white supremacy.
Yeah, I really want to echo that and say that in addition to these issues of does this, kind of provocateur have a right to free speech, there's at the same time less consideration for the free speech of those wishing to protest if someone like that is allowed to come to campus. I'm thinking of the Middlebury response to Charles Murray, author of The Bell Curve, Black people are less intelligent inherently than white people, that guy, who was not only given a space at campus, but introduced by the president of Middlebury. Students were given a free speech zone of protest far removed from the event, and they instead went in and they protested that event. And some students actually also waited outside and surrounded Charles Murray's car when he was leaving. All of those students were disciplined. All of them were put on academic probation. 70 students were put on academic probation. That, to me, is a silencing of students' free speech rights, and it is making the campus unsafe for students of color in particular by saying, we can have a white supremacist to campus, and you are just going to have to suck it up. And if you don't, you are misbehaving. And I think that this is part of a trend that people that protest fascists are the violent ones, or that their violence is equated, or their alleged violence is equated with fascist violence. And I think that in addition to free speech being a very difficult thing to define, I think that what's self-defense and what's violence in these situations also becomes very difficult to define. And I'd say that the university admin consistently criminalizes students and people that are fighting fascism and gives spaces for institutionally supported forms of white supremacy.
Yeah. And clearly, I mean, this we're talking about like power differential and, institutional structures that are oppressive. I mean, this is an example of that. Yeah.
Well, universities can't come up with their own speech codes, banning hate speech, for example. That goes beyond the kind of free speech rights that take place in society at large. This is following up what Cindy said. I mean, this is what our university could do, is to express it, provide a legal definition, or at least one operative on the campus of what is considered hate speech, and that
the Supreme Court has been striking down a lot of these attempts to define hate speech, and they're not making it easy to do
Well,
that.
okay, let
I'm
me
not saying
backtrack.
we shouldn't try.
Let me
I'm just
backtrack from
that
saying that it should
our
be
right-wing
legally,
Supreme Court is
Yeah.
making that hard.
legally defined, but something that is operative on campus. We have student conduct codes for, and also for faculty, that everyone has to abide by. Whether or not it violates your legal rights, that might be another issue.
Yeah, yeah. But no, I mean, this is a litigious society, so anything, even if you are in the right and they know the other side that they're gonna lose, but they're gonna like do it for publicity and propaganda purposes, etc., you go to court, even to the Supreme Court. I mean, this is a time-honored kind of I don't know, a tactic or strategy.
Sure.
Yeah, but still, like in terms of somebody comes like he wants to beat up a professor. I mean, you know, what is that? You know what I'm saying? This guy should be arrested. You know, period. I mean,
Yeah, clearly
Yeah,
in that
yeah.
case, because that
or
that
like
goes,
you know, I say I'm gonna break your neck. You know, I mean that's not free speech, right? I mean, you know.
well,
So,
it's threat.
yeah,
Obvious
yeah.
threat,
I mean,
sure.
yeah,
But that's a
terroristic
violation of
threatening.
law. What I'm saying is,
Yeah.
if there are conduct codes for faculty, staff, students regarding speech,
Yeah.
that there are limits as to what you can say.
Yeah. No, I'm not arguing with you, but I'm talking about what we have just discussed here in terms of free speech and that they are like murky kind of area
Sure,
and
sure.
stuff. Yeah, I understand that. But certain things, I think, like the ones I mentioned, I mean, I don't have any problem with that. Like if I were a policeman arresting this guy, you know, if somebody complains, you know, about that. Right?
But you know, another thing too is that like Professor Okamura just mentioned earlier about the 6-day sit-in for the for the administration building when students were protesting UARC in 2006. So free speech is, you know, it's also something that I think power is happy to allow if that's all that's happening, right? So that's only a piece of it. Free speech needs to be protected when it's intimidating people and, you know, perpetuating violence on people. It needs to be, you know, not seen as free speech. But also, we have to do more than protect free speech to create change on this campus.
Absolutely,
right?
yeah.
We have to actually organize and apply all kinds of pressures to make change.
Sure.
So, because you know, we see governments responding also, like they can wait out a people that are there exercising their free speech and just be like,
Yeah,
all right,
UARC was
you
one
know,
of them. They
yeah,
waited
UARC
us
was
out.
one of them. I feel like every time students have gone to the Board of Regents to talk about TMT and to bring up the breadth of arguments about the TMT, you know, you're in a way you're participating, you're vocalizing, and it's just like just waiting for it to be over, and then boom, go through, you know. So that organizing, and of course ethnic studies itself is a product of much more than free speech, but organizing and applying pressures and really coming together to support. And I think that, you know, going back to what Cindy was saying about anti-Semitism and Zionism, the more we do that actual legwork, these things become not convoluted, right? We will show up for the Jewish student that has a swastika on her door, right? And we will show up for the Palestinian student who's being maybe targeted by Proud Boys or something like that. So those things become clear the more that we not only exercise free speech, but organize and call for action around those things.
Yeah, it's interesting, like talking about the Proud Boys. They are not against anybody, but they are pro-Western, whatever that means, you know. But then pro-Western, you know, if you look at their activities, it's against everybody that was not, you know, white, maybe, or somebody who's
Imperialism and
brainwashed.
destroying the earth.
Ku Klux Klan says that too. We're not anti-black. We just love white people.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's crazy, yeah. So, any other issues that might be coming up that might have implications, like in terms of, you know, I'm thinking about some Palestinian Steve Salaita coming to campus?
Well, I think that Stephen Salaita, who will be coming to campus November 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, and giving some addresses on why Palestine is everyone's moral issue is one of them, and the other is thinking about free speech in relation to the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. And I think that there will be much to learn from that address, not only about the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, but also about how the modern university and corporatization of that modern university and its dependence on donors and so on are all tied together in a kind of anti-Indigenous and Zionist project. So he's someone who makes those kinds of links. His latest book, Internationalism, is really interested in doing some of the work that Ilima is doing on campus, but kind of doing that mapping in relationship to North America and Palestine. So one of the excitements of bringing him here is that I think his vision of connecting struggles and solidarities and finding ways to organize and educate against those really articulates with the work that we're seeing graduate students at the forefront of right now doing on this campus.
Any other activities you have coming up?
I think there's going to be all kinds of things coming up around Mauna Kea. The fight is definitely not over. The legal process that was created by the state and has always been on their terms is not even exhausted, but it has gone through a lot of that. Kanaka Maoli are going to continue to organize on campus and outside, and we've committed to having, if we are so compelled, if they still move machines up the mountain, engaging in nonviolent direct action. And as we do that, the typical tropes are going to come out against us, that we're anti-science, which is not true, that this is all lawful, which is not true, talking about the TMT, and we will absolutely need non-Kanaka allies to speak up and to show up for us because there's a lot to bear coming up in the next year.
Yeah, we have, I think, studies we're going to be showing this documentary from Selma to, Charlottesville, about, the civil rights movement. It's called Answering the Call. It's like November 7th, I think, around 3 o'clock, So more on that will be happening. But, these are very important things. You can see like how it is like at in the highest office, in the United States, like, the President of the United States, how that office can either work against racism or for racism. And here we have a situation where someone is working for racism to build a fascist movement, and that fascist movement has implications not only to the United States as a whole, but also globally as well. Because here we have, in terms of the fascism that is happening and building up as a movement, etc., and then the war danger, globally. It's happening right now, whether it's North Korea or what's happening in Iraq and Syria. What's that?
And climate catastrophe,
climate,
which is inseparable from racism and
yeah,
colonialism right
sure,
now.
Sure. Climate, change and all of that. It's racist in the sense that there are certain atolls in the Pacific that are disappearing, from under the feet of the people, like Tuvalu, for instance, is one of those. Kiribati is another, and so on. Tuvalu, trying to not evict, but rescue people from their own atolls, and all of that is happening right now. So anyway, thank you very much for all of this kind of discussion. And mahalo nui loa, and see you next month. Aloha.